Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonya.
And I'm Kari. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, Kari.
Hi, Sonya.
Kari, we're trying something new today, which is to do a what I eat in a day, which is a very popular social media thing. You find it all the time on YouTube, all the time on TikTok. People love to know what other people eat. And so we thought we would like to know what each other eats, because I always learn something when I hear about what you're actually making day to day.
Well, to give you the credit that you deserve, you're very much more in tune with these trends than I am. But when you pitched this idea to me, I was like, all I want to know is what are you eating all day long? And I also want to imagine what is happening in your kitchen. And so we hope that this inspires other people to share with their best friends, their food friends, and what are you eating and your tips and all those great things.
Yeah, I always learn a lot by watching other people's what I eat in a days, because I just love knowing like what snacks are people grabbing, what brands do they like, what are they really eating for breakfast and lunch. And I prefer the what I eat in a days that are really realistic as opposed to the ones that are highly curated, because you can tell the difference. And I think that we're both aiming for truly realistic, this is what we actually eat in a day. So I'll start us off. And I have to start with how I make coffee. And I think it's worth sharing because I get questions about it from friends. So maybe this is helpful to someone. But I always make French press coffee. I've been making French press coffee for years. I like the taste. I like not using plastic to make my coffee. I have a stainless steel press because we broke so many glass ones.
I have to break in here because you're just describing like, oh yeah, we just make French press. First of all, the French press at your house is like a whole vibe in your house. I've stayed at your house many times. And the first time I experienced coffee at your house, I was like, oh wow, this is so civilized compared to my house, which it's just, we're a fast moving house with my husband. He's a morning person. I am not. We have a drip. There's no ceremony to it. And I will say, in watching some of these videos of people making their French press and their matchas and their espressos, I find it so soothing to watch them. And I live in such an opposite world. So I think you also need to sort of say there is a real beauty and there's a vibe of your house in the morning.
We call it quiet morning time. It's a very ritualistic time with me, my husband, and the cats. We usually read and leisurely sit for a while. We wake up really early to give ourselves that time. I've been doing this even when I was running a restaurant. I would wake up an hour and a half before I had to be at work, even if I had to be at work at 6:30 in the morning. That's just how I am. So anyway, quiet morning time is a ritual. Have to have French press coffee. Okay, but breakfast. So for my first day that I'm sharing, I started my breakfast with 2 jammy eggs, which means they're not quite hard-boiled, not quite soft-boiled, like a 7-minute egg. And I also had 2, and I'm sort of shy to admit this, but I love corn thins, which are like rice cakes, but they're made from corn and they're very thin. And I love that as a vehicle because I don't want too much breadiness often in the morning. So then I top that with almond butter, little sliced almonds, goji berries, and walnuts.
Oh my God,
and that was my breakfast.
That's so healthy. And also, are those, the corn thins are crunchy? Is that the deal?
They're like exactly like a rice cake, but about half the thickness. And they kind of are flavorless. And we'll link everything we're buying and all the recipes in our show notes. But yeah, I just like it as a vehicle for some kind of nut butter. I eat goji berries every morning because this Chinese chef friend of mine told me that they're really healthy and help with eyesight. And I have such bad eyesight. So that's really why I eat it, not for flavor. My whole thing is I used to be a big snacker in the morning. So I want something that's going to keep me full until lunch. And having some high protein, nut-based breakfast always helps me feel full.
Wow, I'm so fascinated. I can't wait to tell you what I eat for breakfast because it's very different.
So for lunch, I had one of my favorite things, as you know, which was homemade tuna salad. And I have my own way of making tuna salad. I'll link that too. I add a lot of fresh herbs, celery, good mayonnaise. I love good bread with my tuna sandwich. I've been getting bread lately from a bakery called Tabor Bread, which uses a lot of local flours, makes sourdoughs. It's run by this wonderful woman. I just really like their bread. So I keep that in the freezer. So I toasted my bread, made a tuna sandwich. I love tuna sandwiches with chips. So this is sort of my little guilty pleasure. And I like this brand right now called Humble Potato Chips. Do you know
I
them?
don't know if I know Humble potato chips. I feel like there's a lot of great potato chips in Portland. I'm sure it's because you're also curating them, but I can see this scene in your dining room. I don't like tuna, as I've mentioned many times before
Yes.
here. And I came to visit and you made me this tuna sandwich, and it was out of this world delicious and so light and so herby. There's just something about the way that you make tuna salad that's really incredible.
In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have served you tuna salad knowing that you really don't
You were
like it.
trying to
but I'm
convert me,
glad.
and you did. I still won't eat anyone else's tuna salad, but when I come to Portland, I like to eat tuna salad.
You'll
Yes.
permit it.
But I want to
I
know
love
about the
that.
potato chips.
I mean, I just think finding a good quality potato chip, if you're going to indulge, get one you really like. I like the ingredients in this brand. It's kind of like a very papery thin potato chip, not quite a Lay's, not quite a Kettle. And I like to stick potato chips in my sandwich. That's a
That was going to
classic.
be my
Served
next
with
question.
yeah.
Yes, I love a crunchy potato chip sandwich.
I always like to have some kind of raw veggies or salad with my lunch. So I had some cut up carrots, some cut up veggies, some pickle. I can kind of eat a lot, to be honest. And so having volume in vegetables makes me feel full. And I also just like the colors. So that's always on my lunch plate. So for dinner, I wanted to try a new recipe. I had some chicken legs in the fridge that I knew I wanted to use up. So I found this recipe on the New York Times by Melissa Clark called sheet pan turmeric chicken and crispy rice. I'm still kind of on the fence if I'll make it again. It definitely tasted great, but it's like, this is why we do this. We test recipes to see, are these really things everyone should be making? Are we going to make them again? There were a lot of things I liked about this recipe, but for a sheet pan recipe, I think it was a little fussy. So for one, you had to make rice or have leftover rice, which just to me is an extra step. It's not hard, but you can't really do anything until your rice is made. So I made some short grain sticky rice. P.S. I love the Coda Farms short grain rice. They're a California rice farm that's really delicious. So I put my rice in the rice cooker. While your rice is cooking, you are supposed to marinate your chicken in turmeric, ginger, and garlic, and maybe lemon, I think is in there too. And it says to let your chicken marinate for 30 minutes while it sort of comes to room temperature, which is always good advice to let your meat come to room temperature a little bit before you cook it. It helps with browning and cooking evenly. So I did that. And then what you do is you take your rice and you dot it, like you put it on your sheet pan, like an oiled sheet pan. And I actually used the Great Jones sheet pan that you just gifted me recently for my birthday.
Wait, which color did you use?
The green one.
Such a good color.
Which I will just say, don't use it without a parchment paper if you're using turmeric because it will stain your pan. So you don't want to stain your pan. But generally for those sheet pans, you don't need to line them, which is so great. They're not sponsoring us. We just both
love
genuinely
them.
love these
You
pans.
gifted them to me
Yeah.
a couple years ago, and I use them all the time. It's time for you to have your own.
I love them. And so, okay, so you put your rice on the sheet pan and you oil it really well. And then you dot a little bit more of that marinade on top of the rice so that turmeric ginger kind of infuses the rice. And you add scallions to the rice too. And then you nestle in your chicken into the rice. It basically tells you to like make divots and put the chicken
The
in.
chicken is cooking on this rice. And then is the schmaltz, like the chicken fat, so also supposed to help make this rice crispy? When someone promises crispy rice, I want it to be crispy.
It was outstandingly crispy.
great.
It was
Okay.
maybe too crispy is
Ooh.
even my note. It really delivered on crispiness. And then you top it with scallions at the end. So it was absolutely delicious. So you can't go wrong with turmeric, ginger, and garlic as your flavorings on chicken. I would just say that the rice gets super, super crispy. So parts of it were perfect where it just had like a crisp edge and then the fluffy middle sort of.
Right.
But then some of it just was like really almost cracker-like. So That's my only note. Also, that it's not a 30-minute meal. There's not a lot of active time. It only takes 15 minutes of maybe active time, but I think it cooked for 45 minutes or 50 minutes in the oven. So those are just all things to know. But I like the idea of this. I think I might play around with it in my own way. So yeah, that was my dinner. Oh, and then after dinner every night, I have a cup of tea, usually mint tea or ginger tea, and usually a square of some kind of dark chocolate.
Again, so civilized. I love coming to visit you because there's just such a vibe in your house. The morning starts so beautifully and the day ends so beautifully. And that does not happen at my house, which is okay. That's the season of life that I'm in. So,
Absolutely.
so I am starting with a mango smoothie. And the truth is I'm not much of a breakfast eater anymore. I used to be a much bigger breakfast eater, but I found that as I've gotten older, I kind of like to wait a little bit before I eat breakfast. But I am the breakfast and packed lunch maker in the morning, especially for my 9-year-old son when he's getting ready to go to school and then taking his packed lunch to school. So I generally try to make something alongside of whatever I'm making for him. And he's been on this smoothie kick. And so I made him a mango smoothie. It's a mango, a banana, a couple of oranges, mint, hemp seed, and yogurt. And,
Oh, wow.
I shared a couple of weeks ago that we were making this orange Julius smoothie. And there were two really great tips that I took from that recipe. One of which is you zest your orange before you cut it open. And that zest adds a lot of really great flavor to a smoothie. And then the other thing that I'm doing is instead of using orange juice, I use the whole orange. So I use a serrated tomato knife and I slice off the top and the bottom of my orange and then I cut them around. And then I usually cut them in the middle just to make sure there aren't any seeds. And I throw them in whole with the banana and the mango. And we've kind of pivoted to mango because they've been on sale at the grocery store. And my son loves mango. If you don't have mango fresh, you can just use a frozen mango. And I blend all the fruit together and make sure it's really creamy because also those hemp seeds, which I just add for a little extra nutrition, those need a little time for blending. I add some ice, I blend that up, and then I add the yogurt at the very end to kind of make it creamy. One of the things that my son seems to really like in his smoothies is fresh mint.
That was really the surprise ingredient when you started describing this, because everything you said doesn't totally surprise me, but also sounds so healthy and delicious. But then you said fresh mint. I'm like, I don't normally add that to smoothies.
Well, I hadn't either, but I actually had my cousin call me a couple years ago and she was like, our smoothies are really bland. What could I add to them? And it took me a minute to think about it, but I was like, well, how about some fresh herbs like mint? I just sort of came out and then she was like, oh, this is really delicious. And we have mint. We keep it in a pot outside of our kitchen. And for most of the year, we have it. And my son loves to harvest it. So the mint has come back. We're not even buying it at the grocery store anymore. And I can get him out there and have him clip a few leaves of mint. And he loves it.
It sounds so delicious. Also, I think it's a really important point that you put your mint in a pot, because if you put it straight in the ground, it'll spread all over your garden.
Yeah, and you don't want that. And so when I make his smoothie, I serve it to him with his breakfast, and then I usually put mine in the fridge. I kind of go back to it maybe around like 10:30 or 11. So on this day, my lunch was a lot better than it usually is. And one of the things that, as I've shared before, I really consider myself a sort of lame lunch person. And I didn't consider this until I actually went and worked at your house one day many years ago. And you and Jonathan were making lunch. And I was like, wow, this is like a full, beautiful meal. And there was a lot of preparation and setting of the table. And I'm someone who I open up the fridge and whatever I see, that's usually what I will go for. And so I'm kind of excited to just say I had really good leftovers this day. My lunch was leftover sheet pan eggplant lasagna. I was really inspired by our meatless mains episode. I was really interested in making the eggplant parmesan, which I bought the ingredients for and I kind of started the recipe, and then I left the eggplant like in the fridge cooked for a few days. And then by the time we were ready to eat the eggplant parmesan, we kind of wanted something more substantial for dinner. So I sort of mixed that recipe with the sheet pan lasagna recipe and I just layered them together. And we all went nuts. It was so delicious. And I don't think I will ever make lasagna the proper way again. I just love the crispy bits.
It's so interesting that we both had crispy sheet pan
Yes.
meals as part of our days.
Yes.
I love one of the things I love about you too is you of course are amazing at finding recipes, but you're also amazing at testing and making the recipes. So it's always helpful to me to hear what you changed, what you're making, what you tried, what worked. And I love that sheet pan lasagna, but I love it even more with this idea of a combination of eggplant parm and lasagna.
Yeah, there were some really great tips. Like there were dots of ricotta on it, but she
Yeah.
suggested that you put some garlic and some salt and pepper and some herbs. So I just chopped up the basil and put it into the mixed it into the ricotta. And so every bite was really flavorful. So what was great was there was a little bit left over. I stuck it in the oven and all those crispy bits or even the softer bits that were in the middle that no one ate then became crispy when I reheated it. It was like an especially delicious lunch. And then this was also a day where I pick Mac up from school and he has two activities. So we have like a pretty substantial snack on this day. And this day I made crackers, sliced cucumber with everything bagel seasoning. And I also brought him a meat stick.
Yeah, like Chomps
Yeah,
or
it's a
whatever
Chomps.
brand.
Yeah, it's a Chomps brand.
Okay.
Yeah, he loves those.
Yeah.
They're not my thing, but we had basically like a Triscuit. There's a brand called Back to Nature that
I love that
I do
brand.
too.
Their crackers taste so good.
yeah, they're kind of like the OG Triscuits and Ritz, but not with all the chemically things. And so, one of the tips that I think is worth sharing is I slice up Persian cucumbers. I kind of cut them on the bias. I throw them in a container, and then I bring a little jar of the everything bagel seasoning and a spoon with me so I can sprinkle that on right before we eat. I like it that it's still crunchy when I'm eating them. So that was our snack. We usually eat it in the car. And then he goes to his class. And then he comes out of that class and I drop him off at the park for another practice. It's kind of a busy day. And so then I came home and I'm so excited to tell you this. I made buttermilk pancakes for dinner.
That is so fun. I never do that. I love this. And do you have a good recipe for
Well,
them?
I also very rarely make buttermilk pancakes for dinner, but we were getting ready to go on our school camp out. And one of the things that we do on our school camp out is we do two potlucks. There's a Friday night potluck that's like burgers and hot dogs. And then there's a Sunday morning potluck that's eggs, pancakes, bacon, bagels, fruit, that kind of thing. I had signed up to bring pancake mix. And so I decided to try Allison Roman's recipe. And it was bonkers good. It was so delicious. It's very standard, all-purpose flour, a little bit of sugar, baking soda, baking powder, salt. And then when you're ready, you mix in eggs and buttermilk and they turn really crispy and we just loved them.
What a fun dinner. I love that. And I love that you were testing it in advance of your camp out. What a great day of eating. Kari, it's actually really helpful for me to hear what you're eating. It gives me ideas. It makes me think about your rhythm of your day. It's like a window into something I didn't even know I needed. And, I also, like you, I actually like to eat breakfast later. I should have amended that. I don't eat quite as late as you, but I tend to eat breakfast around 9. So I'm up for a few hours before I eat. So my next day, I ate something that is actually more of my regular go-to breakfast. I usually make some kind of yogurt bowl. Again, I want things that are high in protein and that make me feel full until lunch. I've been really loving the Bellwether Farms whole milk yogurt that I get at Costco. I don't know if you know that brand.
I love that brand so much. It's so creamy and rich.
So creamy and rich. That's why it's really filling. It's really delicious. And Costco, it's a really good deal. It costs the same as whole milk plain yogurt at the grocery store. I usually pick up several packages because
I
it
don't
lasts
blame
for
you.
months.
It's a little fancy.
Yeah, it's a little
It's
fancy.
like a nice way to start your day with something like that.
Yes. Yeah. So I get whole milk yogurt. I had some cut up apple. I added a few frozen raspberries from what I picked this summer. I like to sort of dole those out before the new raspberries come. Walnuts, almonds, goji berries, as I mentioned. And I also like to add a little nut butter, like almond butter. And again, that just feels really filling and tides me over, and it's really satisfying to me. For lunch, I, like you, like to incorporate some leftovers. So I had some of the sticky rice from the sheet pan.
Right.
And I had leftover tuna salad because when I make a batch of tuna salad, I always make extra to have in the fridge for the week. So I took my leftover sticky rice, I heated that up, but then I topped it with just fridge cold tuna salad, some sliced crisp green lettuce, and I had some pickles, radish, and carrot. I topped it with a little bit of sesame seeds. I did a little bit of balsamic vinegar over the lettuce. I wanted some acidity. And that was sort of a tuna rice bowl for lunch. And that felt really light and really filling as well.
I mean, I think that's such a great idea. And I think it's a great way to use up your leftovers. But also, if you went to a cafe and basically had that, it would be like $20, right? And you're just eating your leftovers. But, I think adding like the little pickly elements, that's definitely something I learned from you is even when you're doing leftovers, you add these extra little bits. That really makes it feel like a special lunch instead of just this something that's kind of sad that I'm always just putting something together sad to keep my day moving.
I don't think your lunches are as sad as you think they are. And I don't think everyone has to be the same. What I love about this conversation is there's a whole lot of people who are like you. They just want to get through lunch or they just need to get through lunch. And then there's people like me who maybe they're Tauruses or earth signs and really like to have a proper lunch. So I just think it's nice to see the contrast and what works. And so I do think, though, if you have a salad already in your fridge, a tuna salad, a chicken salad, even a good potato salad, that can be added to a bowl with other fresh veggies and you have a complete meal. So on this day, I actually had snack. I don't always have snack, but this day my friend came by and she had baked a version of one of my recipes. She had baked these tahini rye chocolate chunk cookies. My gosh. And so she brought me one. And so I had to eat that as a snack. And that was delicious. And her name is Katie Gorley. She's a baker in town. Her sweets are never that sweet. So it actually felt more like, it almost felt like a health cookie in a way. It wasn't, I'm not saying that, but it felt like it because of the rye flour, the tahini, the really good dark chocolate, and that it wasn't that sweet.
I mean, what a beautiful gift in the middle of your day, too, that your friend baked these cookies and then brought them to you.
It was so sweet.
Love that.
So for dinner, I made truly one of our staples, my crispy gochujang glazed tofu, which I am writing up a recipe for because I can't find anything online that's exactly what I make. But I make a simple gochujang sauce. Gochujang is Korean red pepper paste. You could do some swaps, which I'll put in the recipe if you can't find that. But really, it's like a soy-based sauce. Pepper paste, soy, rice vinegar, a little sweetener like with maple syrup, and a few other things if you want them or not. But that's the foundation. Oh, garlic and ginger.
You're just like thinning it out a little bit. So it's a little bit more viscous, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then I toss my tofu in potato starch, as you know, or you could do cornstarch. And then I crisp it up in a pan over medium heat. So I just let it get nice and toasty and brown.
You do it in a pan. You don't do it in the oven.
I sometimes do in the oven. When I make this particular recipe, I usually do this in a pan on my stovetop. So I take a little coconut oil or avocado oil. I melt it in a pan or cast iron pan, nonstick, whatever you have. And then I take my cubed tofu that's tossed in potato starch. I add that to the pan and I let it crisp up. While that was happening, I was steaming sweet potato. I've been obsessed with steamed sweet potato. It's been the theme of the past few months. I just love the texture and flavor of a steamed sweet potato. So I just get a pot out, clean the potatoes, put them in whole and steam them. Add water, turn on the heat, close the lid, let it steam. So I let that steam for a while. And then at the very end, the last 5 to 10 minutes of steaming, I added cut up broccoli to the potatoes so I could steam some broccoli too. Oh, one thing I didn't mention in my first day is that we had salad on the side of that crispy chicken and I had made this yogurt tahini dressing. And this is another thing I just like to have in my fridge. And yogurt tahini dressing is really simple to make. It's mostly yogurt and tahini and water to thin it out. So I had some leftover of that. So that's what I drizzled on top of my steamed broccoli. Then I had my crispy gochujang glazed tofu. And then for my sweet potato, I had another thing I had made a week prior that was in my fridge, which is going to sound really fancy, but was homemade ramp butter.
Oh my God, you're so fancy. We don't get, you get ramps up there though. You guys have a lot of ramps and they're hard for us to find down here and they cost an arm and a leg.
Yeah, they don't really grow in California as far as I know. Ramps are like wild garlic, essentially. They taste very garlicky, very oniony, and you can only get them for a few weeks. So when I find them at the farmer's market, which is even rare here, I grab a bunch and I make a compound butter, which is essentially blending butter with the ingredient. And I'll link a recipe for that too. And then that butter you can freeze and have it for months. So you can enjoy that delicate ramp flavor, which is so nice. But you could make a scallion butter, you could make a chive butter, you could make any kind of herb butter. And I love an herb butter on a sweet potato is the point. So when I served this, I had this pre-made ramp butter. I had this pre-made yogurt tahini sauce. The only sauce I made that night was the one for my tofu. And this actually, again, maybe sounds fancy, but it all came together pretty quickly in about 30 to 40 minutes.
I think those tips are also so helpful. It's like when you're making something, you just make a little extra and you stick it in your freezer or stick it in your fridge. You know, a few days later or a couple months later, when you're making something as simple as basically tofu, sweet potatoes, and broccoli, you have these condiments that actually make things feel very special and very chefy. You could put this on a menu, and if you described it, people would be like, oh, wow, that's so fancy. But really, us home cooks can do this. Even making a compound scallion butter, to your point, just chop up some scallions, mix them into some softened butter, add a little bit more salt and pepper, and call it a day.
And lemon zest.
And lemon zest, yes.
If you add zest into your compound butter, it's also going to add so much flavor. But if you didn't have compound butter, steamed sweet potato with a good salty butter is also delicious. Sprinkle on some cinnamon if that's your thing. You know, there's so many ways to do this really simply. For me, it felt simple because I already had it on hand. But when I don't have it on hand, I've used regular butter and added salt and enjoyed that.
Yeah. So, Sonya, I want to share my second day as well. We had Adrienne Hale come onto our podcast and talk about how she makes this communal bread, and it makes 2 loaves. And it really pulled me back into the world of sourdough post the pandemic. I still am in the zone of making this bread very often. What I do is I've kind of landed on a recipe that I like. It's about 60% bread flour and 40% whole wheat flour. And when I make them, I end up with 2 loaves. And so I slice them and I stick them in my freezer because we are a toast family. We eat a lot of toast. So when I'm making my son's breakfast and lunch, I will make toast for him, and then I'll usually toast another slice or 2 for myself. We live in California. There's a lot of avocados. So we do eat a lot of avocado toast. So this day we had avocado toast. We like the everything bagel seasoning from Thrive Market. I order a lot of groceries for them. I've been a longtime Thrive customer. And one of the other fun things that my son and I like to eat for breakfast is we like a cold pear. So when I buy pears at the grocery store, I like to let them get soft, and then I stick them in the fridge.
Oh, what an interesting detail.
Yes, I like them to get to the place where you can't really take them out of the house because they're too soft. And then you just stick them in the fridge. And in the morning, I cut the pear. And so we usually share a cold pear for breakfast, which is kind of a fun thing. And then on this day, I had glow soup and a bag of Fritos for lunch. So we talked about glow soup. In the fall, you brought this viral glow soup to our conversation for fall soups. And it's basically a mix of leeks, carrots, peppers, turmeric, and coriander. So it's kind of all these antioxidant-rich vegetables. And you puree it all up, and you add either veggie broth or chicken broth and some coconut milk, and it's really creamy and really delicious, and also the color's really beautiful. I made it so many times throughout the winter, but because we had also just gone on this camping trip, I cut up vegetables like carrots, celery, and peppers, and I put them in little bags, and I just packed too many, so we didn't eat them all. So I kind of came home with all these vegetables that were meant to be eaten raw, but they sort of been out, and had people touch them? I'm not sure. And so I was like, I'm not going to serve these raw, but I can make glow soup. I basically repurposed all these great cut up vegetables. And then we also had some Fritos left over from the weekend. And so it was a real high-low moment. It was like this.
Well, it's all about balance.
It's all about balance.
Sounds incredible.
Yeah. And then one of the other things that I made for our camping trip was strawberry rhubarb streusel bars.
Oh my gosh. How have you never talked about this before? Or is this the first time?
This was the first time I had ever made these streusel bars. I've shared a lot about my friend Maylin. We see each other each week, and she's also a very prolific home cook. A couple years ago, made these raspberry streusel bars, kind of like oaty, buttery, with some raspberry jam in them for a hiking trip that we went on. And I've kind of been like thinking about them for the last couple of years, and I've just never made them myself. But she also scored some rhubarb at the Santa Monica Farmers Market and offered me some. And so I had this rhubarb and I was like, okay, well, strawberry rhubarb, you just talked about that strawberry rhubarb pie. And I found this recipe. It worked like a charm. It's very, very simple. Basically, you just cook the fruit, you set that aside, and then you melt butter into oats, flour, a little bit of leavening, salt, and sugar. And you press that into a pan, you add the fruit, you mix a little bit of that crust on top, press it down. What's great about a bar like that is that they travel really well.
I love fruit bars.
Yes.
They remind me of my grandmother. And a few months ago, I made one with frozen sour cherries that I had from the summer.
Wow.
And I think a tangy fruit filling, which rhubarb is, with that sweetness of the strawberries, with that buttery, sweet crumb top and bottom, to me, it's one of the best cookie bar desserts you can have.
I fully agree with you. I mean, it's really nothing better. So I stuck a couple of those in the freezer so that they would be waiting for me at some point when I really wanted a snack.
Also, people should know that you love frozen desserts and you eat them frozen,
And I do eat them
which is one of Kari's signature taste profiles.
I think part of this might have come from my dad. My mom makes him chocolate chip cookies and she just sticks a big box of them in the freezer. And so every night he goes and gets a couple of cookies and he just brings them out and eats them while he's watching TV. And so I did make them and I shared them at the camp out, but I left a couple for myself. So that was a lovely snack in the middle of my day. And then for dinner, again, to be all about balance, I made a sheet pan crispy tofu with broccoli and I tossed it with rice noodles and the same sauce that is from the sheet pan japchae recipe. So a couple of weeks ago, I shared that I made Eric Kim's sheet pan japchae. You boil your noodles while your vegetables are cooking in the oven, and then you make this really simple dressing, which I was like, oh, I want to make this dressing for a lot of other things. So it's soy sauce, brown sugar, a little bit of maple syrup, and a clove of grated garlic. You just basically put your noodles onto the sheet pan with your sauce, toss it all together. And it really made me think about you because I still struggle. Even when you said you made crispy tofu, I was like, wait, you make it in a pan? I think what I downloaded from our conversations was like you make it in the oven and it gets crispy and it's sort of hands off. And I guess you can do it both ways.
Yeah, I make it both ways. I do think it gets slightly crispier in a skillet, I do have to say.
Well, that's a good reminder. I was really looking for ease, and I sort of had these things already in the fridge, and I really like that sauce. So testing these recipes, once you start cooking, it just yields more dinners, right?
Yeah, I think it's really clear that we actually make things we talk about, that we really do love sheet pan meals. I love that that came up for both of us, that leftovers are our friend, that we're using our freezers, that there's stuff you make ahead and I make ahead that we rely on. I mean, I think there's a lot that just sort of is interesting to hear in action. So I'm excited to do this again in the future.
I was just thinking the same thing. I feel like we should check in a couple months and sort of get different ideas. This has been fun.
Until next time,
bye. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.